What's up guys, welcome back to another GGF video review, and today I'll be taking a look at the 901 from Be Quiet. Now this case has been out for a little while now, so it has taken us some time to get around to check it out. But the good thing for us is that Be Quiet did announce the white version at CES early this year, so we do have both the black and the white model to take a look at in this review. So this video is going to cover everything you need to know about this case, and there is a lot to cover, so let's jump in and get started. The 901 from Be Quiet has been out for a while now, and after many requests from you guys to review this case, the time has finally come. Be Quiet also just recently released the 901 in white, so we'll be taking a look at both options in this video. In this review, I'll go over everything you need to know about the 901, from outside aesthetics, internal support, and of course, all the custom water cooling features which have been the main requests I've received on this case. The 901 is Be Quiet's flagship full tower chassis and has more features than you can poke a stick at. I'll go over these throughout this video, as well as the price for the 901, but I can tell you now, it's not cheap. Before we start with the case itself, you're greeted with not one, but two accessory boxes. This will be hands down the most extras I've seen come with a case before. The larger of the two boxes contains all the included accessories, such as front mesh conversion kit, side 360 conversion bracket, PSU shroud airflow cover, and a rear hard drive cable cover. The second is labeled parts box, but I feel these are just more accessories and Be Quiet wasn't able to fit them all in one box. These include the interesting anti-sag bracket for your GPU, EATX cable management cover, VGA holder for the inverted layout, screws with a storage container, and an optical disk drive bracket. And yes, for those guys out there who always ask that same question, yes, this case does support one 5¼ CD-ROM drive. The 901 has Be Quiet's typical styling, which has been around for many years now. I feel Be Quiet aren't the only ones in this situation, but maybe a refresh might be coming. Chassis dimensions come in at 570 high, 254 wide, and 590 deep. I find the 901 is quite a wide case for a single chamber layout. For example, the Fantex MV7 is just 6mm wider, but is a dual chamber case. The main internal chassis is made from SGCC steel for the feet. Exterior panels are made from ABS plastic, but are inlaid with about 0.8 aluminum for that premium feel. On the black model, these are brushed and painted white on the white model. Be Quiet has always been about silence, and the 901 can be configured in two ways, silent or airflow mode. By default, the chassis comes set up in silent mode. Now for most of you, or anyone who wants to run some high-end gear in this case, I'd quickly be changing this to the airflow orientation. In silent mode, the top of the chassis comes installed with a pop-out mesh panel, but under that, you'll find two of Be Quiet's traditional sound dampening panels. These are hard up against the top fan spots, and as heat rises, there really isn't anywhere for it to escape. There is mesh on the top, but most of it is blocked from the case frame. I would definitely be removing these panels and installing top exhaust fans up here. The front of the chassis is also set up in silent mode with yet another sound dampening panel with front ventilation only coming from the left and right side mesh. This mesh area looks quite large, but most of it is blocked from the internal case frame. But Be Quiet include a front mesh kit in the accessory box, which is a nice touch, as many other brands do have mesh conversion kits as optional extras. This is installed by pulling off the entire front, popping out the silent front panel, and replacing it with the mesh panel. Once installed, the mesh panel seamlessly fits into place, matching nicely. The main side panel is 100% transparent, made from 4mm thick tempered glass, and slides on and off with two cap-2 thumb screws. One thing I would have liked to see here, and also in a few other areas, are maybe white or silver screws instead of black. One interesting feature on the black model of the 901 is it seems that the side panel is also 100% clear. This is very uncommon for black cases, and I don't actually mind it. The rear side panel is removed the same way, and once again has Be Quiet sound dampening on the inside with a ventilated area if running side mounted fans or a radiator inside the chassis. 3 dust filters can be found, a full length slide out filter can be found at the bottom, a pop out filter at the front behind the front panel, and even a little magnetic filter can be found over the optical drive area if it's not being used. Nice. Moving up to front I/O, and Be Quiet have always done well in this area, and the 901 is no exception. For USB, there's 4 USB 3.2 Type A ports and 1 USB 3.2 Gen 2 Type C port, dedicated headphone and microphone ports with power button and power LED in the middle. Oh, and did I mention all these ports are illuminated and the controls are touch sensitive. Left to this, you'll find the fan controller. Tap the right icon to increase fan speed, and tap the left icon to decrease. These control the 3 pre-installed 140mm Silent Wings 4 PWM fans. To the right, you'll find the RGB control, which controls the accent lighting along the PSU shroud as well as the front RGB strip. This is also touch sensitive, with the right icon controlling RGB color and the left cycling through the RGB mode. And then there's a sync button to output to your motherboard's RGB header. Two really nice touches here. When cycling through the RGB modes or the RGB colors, the 5 little indicator lights in between the two icons actually replicate what the RGB is actually doing on the case. And second, all the IO lights and backlight controls are dim after about 7 seconds of no interaction. Also up the top is a wireless charger for your mobile phone. This isn't the first time Be Quiet have done this, but this time the unit has been upgraded to a 15-watt wireless charger, which is quite impressive. With my S23 at 50% battery, it was going to take 1 hour and 34 minutes to fully charge my device. Inside the 901, we find a similar look to the older 900 Rev 2, but with updated features. To the right of the motherboard tray, by default, is a pre-installed hard drive and SSD tray. On its own, this cannot be used, but instead is to be used with Be Quiet's own HDD Cage 2 drive cages. The 901 comes with 2 of these pre-installed at the bottom, but if you wish to purchase more, they retail for about $16 each, as the side hard drive tray can take a total of 5 of these cages. These cages can also take 2.5-inch SSDs, if not using 3.5-inch hard drives. For those not wanting this amount of storage, an included swap-out 360 side fan bracket is in the accessory box. To me, I feel this should be the default option, and the default hard drive tray should not even be included, but more an optional extra, as to fully use it, you need to purchase extra cages anyway. Motherboard support is up to eATX, but when installing an eATX motherboard, some things need to be moved around for better cable routing, as things are a bit tight. To do this, either the right hard drive tray or 360 fan bracket, whichever you are using, needs to be removed and rotated. This now gives us an extra set of cable holes for routing your 24-pin and so on. For eATX boards, Be Quiet even include a right angle cable cover to make things a bit neater if going with this option. For even larger boards like MSI Godlikes, I found this option worked nicely as well. Moving back down to regular ATX, I found the supplied cable cover worked well, and there's 2 adjustment options as well. For cable cutouts and grommets, we actually don't have any at all, and I kind of like this look. Along the top and bottom are just left completely open, which is mainly due to the motherboard tray being removable. Cable management to the right of the motherboard is similar, with just one large cutout, which is then covered by that cable cover which I mentioned above. One thing to mention as we move forward with case reviews is back connector support, and because the 901 has been out for a while now, this case does not support this feature. As I said earlier, 3 140mm Silent Wings 4 PWM fans are pre-installed in the 901. One nice touch is that the top and front fan locations have their own dedicated fan connections directly on each of the fan brackets. Unlike on other cases, there's normally just one fan controller located around the back, where you then have to route all case fans back to this controller or hub. On the 901, fans can be installed directly on each bracket outside the case, cabled up and then plugged into each fan hub on the bracket before installing back into the case, and that's it. The fans are now connected back to the built-in fan controller via pogo pins. This is really nice, and not having to run cables at once installing the fan bracket back in is like nothing I've seen before. But is this unique feature a little too late? With the popularity of daisy chainable fans and software controlled fans, I feel this may soon be made redundant or just not used for most users. For GPU support, there's an easy 485mm of clearance for GPU length to the very front of the chassis, but if you need to use the side 360 fan mount or the side mounted hard drive bracket for storage, I had to flip this bracket around to eATX mode for hard drives to clear my test Strix 4080 GPU. I also found that with the side hard drive bracket in eATX mode, the drive cages were very tight to install and remove. There's 345mm to the bracket in its default position, and in its rotated eATX position, there is now 360mm. The same goes with the side fan bracket. I was only able to install fans onto this bracket in the main section with my test Strix 4080 GPU with the bracket in eATX mode, but fans can always go behind this bracket if needed. Keep this in mind if you wish to use the side area with longer GPUs. Clearance for GPU width for Waterblocked cards is roughly 180mm, which is more than enough. And as you can see with this Strix 4090 with an Optimus block, there is plenty of room, while CPU air cooler height is 192mm. Be Quiet also includes this very interesting anti-sag bracket in the form of a big L shape. This bracket has a magnetic base which attaches to the top of the PSU shroud, and it also acts as a cable duct for your GPU power cable as well. Personally, I just find the solution way too bulky and feel a more out-of-sight anti-sag bracket could have looked better. And as for the cable cover, I still prefer the look of a simple sleeved GPU cable. In terms of functionality, I found this bracket worked fine with my test Strix 4080 GPU. The 901 features vertical GPU support. This is exactly the same as on the Shadowbase 800 series, which I covered about 6 months back. I found I had the same issues here as I did then. For instance, to remove the PCI bracket to go vertical, you cannot have a motherboard installed. You'll also need to purchase Be Quiet's own riser cable because the PSU shroud top has no actual mounting points. Their riser cable simply just sits on top. This also only comes in black, and lastly, once you get everything in, screwing down your GPU is nearly impossible. One part that follows Be Quiet's 900 series tradition is the ability to invert the motherboard layout. By having this also means the motherboard tray is removable. Even if you don't use the inverted layout, having just a removable motherboard tray is always handy. Inverting the 901 is quite simple and is done with just a few steps. First, you remove the motherboard tray by 4 screws, 2 at the front and 2 at the rear, then pull the motherboard tray out. Next, we need to remove the side hard drive bracket and the support pillar next to it, as well as the bottom hard drive bracket. The last thing we need to do before installing everything back in is pop off the front PSU shroud cover and disconnect the RGB cable. Now we can spin the case around and install everything back in the opposite side. This includes the center support pillar, the side hard drive bracket, and the bottom hard drive bracket as well. The motherboard tray is flipped, slid back in, and secured into place. Install the RGB cable back into the PSU shroud front cover and pop back into place. The final thing to do is to spin the top fan bracket around, swapping over the fan hub on both the case and the fan bracket. Now this completes the inverted layout. PSU support is found at the bottom under the PSU shroud, and units are slid in from the back via a removable PSU bracket. There's a massive 320mm for PSU length, and if you require more, you can pop out the divider between the PSU area and the storage area for even extra room. Moving on to storage, and the 901 can accommodate a lot here, but to max the case out, you'll need to spend a bit more money. In the case's stock configuration, a dual drive cage can be found at the bottom in front of the PSU. These are the HDD cage 2 drive cages I mentioned earlier. These can each take one 3.5-inch hard drive or two 2.5-inch SSDs. This area can be completely removed altogether if not being used to provide extra room for cables and so on. While 2 more 2.5-inch SSD sleds can be found directly behind the motherboard tray. So that's a total of 6 SSDs or 2 hard drives that are supported in the 901's stock configuration. If you wish to push the storage capabilities even further, you can purchase 5 more of Be Quiet's HDD Cage 2 drive cages to completely max out the case. These 5 cages are installed in the hard drive bracket to the right of the motherboard. This will now give you support for 7 3.5-inch hard drives or a whopping 16 2.5-inch SSDs. I do appreciate how Be Quiet have detailed this under the technical data on the website and haven't just listed the overall max support, which could be confusing to some. Be Quiet have even included a rear hard drive cable cover. I mean, it's not really needed as the rear side panel is solid, but it definitely cleans up this area if running multiple drives. Another storage option, and something I haven't had to cover in a very long time, is that the 901 has support for a 5.25-inch optical drive. The CD-ROM drive location is hidden out of sight behind a drop-down door at the bottom at the front. If requiring the use of a CD-ROM drive, you'll need to use the supplied optical disc bracket. This bracket is installed from the inside, and the CD-ROM drive is slid into place and secured in from both sides. The bottom dual hard drive cage will need to be removed if installing a CD-ROM drive. While the dual hard drive cage is removed, we can talk about the 120 or 140mm fan location down here as well. In conjunction with the included PSU shroud airflow cover, this now replaces the stock cover on the PSU shroud. Once a fan is installed at the bottom, the idea behind this vent or duct is to direct air up towards the GPU for extra cooling. Rear cable management I found quite impressive, with 4 of what I would call cable routing channels. These channels are to hold and hide cables inside them and help guide cables to and from their designated areas. These channels also have slits in them to allow the supplied Velcro cable ties to pass through and secure cables. These channels can be removed altogether if not required. I'll touch base on how cable management went at the end of the video once I've completed my build in the 901. Moving on to cooling support, and the 2 main areas are the front 420 and the top 420 locations. Just to be clear, the top will only support 3 140mm fans, but not a 420 all-in-one cooler or 420 radiator for a custom loop. The max here in that case is a 360, but the front does support a 420 radiator, and I'll touch base on that soon. For all-in-one cooler support, I had no issues with my test Eco Nucleus 360 in either the top or front locations. For 420 all-in-one coolers, my test Asus Pro 420 had no issues at the front, but one thing to note here is how close this all-in-one cooler went to the side hard drive and fan brackets. I was able to still use the side hard drive bracket and the cages slotted in with not even a millimeter to spare. But for the 360 fan bracket, I was unable to install fans onto this bracket in the main section due to the front all-in-one cooler fouling. I also had the same issue even with my EK Test all-in-one cooler. The ProArt 420 all-in-one cooler is 55mm thick, so this is something to keep an eye on if you wish to use the side bracket for fans in the main section. For custom water cooling support, there's not a whole lot to cover here, as I would say the 901 isn't meant to be a water cooling monster. At the top we find just 65mm of clearance for radiator and fans. This is because the top radiator bracket is pretty much centered in the case, which prohibits the radiator and fans to run down past your motherboard. Here I was able to fit a 40mm thick Bitspower Leviathan 2 360 radiator with fans. This combination comes to exactly 65mm. For the front, there's 67mm of clearance for radiator and fans, which can fit up to a 420 or 360. Removing the front PSU cover cap doesn't help increase 420 radiator thickness, but it does help if going with a 360, as fans can now pass through into this gap. But to be honest, leaving this open like this just to fit a thicker radiator does look a bit weird. If using the full radiator allowance at the front, you will lose all 3.5-inch storage support the 901 has on offer. The two bottom drive cages need to be removed, and the side hard drive bracket doesn't clear either. For the side fan bracket, fans can only be installed on the back side of this bracket and not the front due to the radiator and fan thickness. For radiator support in the inverted layout, the front stays the same, but we see a huge jump in clearance at the top. Because the motherboard is now upside down, radiators can now run past the motherboard, giving me roughly 110mm of clearance to the bottom PCIe slot on this ROG Z790 Formula motherboard. Here I was able to install a 60mm thick Watercooling UT60 360 radiator with fans. Alrighty guys, now like always, let's take a look at the final build. So that is the final build there. Of course, coolant color, I had to go orange because Be Quiet are known for that orange. Now, just a few things to cover before finishing this video up. Now, early in the video, I did say I will go over how well the rear cable management went. I had no issues at all. It does actually look pretty empty now. I do have quite a high-end build here. I've got the two rads, that is 7 fans, 3 at the front, 3 at the top, and then 1 at the rear. The pass-throughs even go through. I've got a heap of tubing. One thing I really do like is the front PSU cover here. You can pop that off and that gives you working access on both sides. You can use the front side, you can use the back side. There's even a bit of room between the PSU and this front. I was able to jam in a lot of cables, pop them in and then push this back on, and it just made sort of a neat little compartment instead of just putting all the cables around this area. So I had no issues at all. Maybe if you were going to go with a bunch of hard drives, 2.5 inch, 3.5 inch, it might be a little bit different, but I can't see you having any issues there. Now, the anti-sag bracket, which is this one here, I just want to go over maybe a different possibility that you could go with. Now, I did mention earlier that it would probably look better with something like this, just a single sleeve cable. Now, not everyone is going to go down the route of a custom cable, but I do think with the price of this case, you're probably going to have a nice set of cables or a nice PSU that's going to have its own dedicated 12-volt high power cable. But what I do think this cover would be, because it's so big and bulky, it would be good to hide the breakout cable you do get with NVIDIA cards. So this would sit basically up in here and it would clean it up a little bit better instead of running this over here where it's covering just one card. And especially being water blocked, you don't need to use this anyway because the cards are so much shorter. Now, the side rad location where this reservoir is, I didn't really go over that in the video, but I do want to mention that my EK Test all-in-one cooler actually didn't fit in the side. I don't know why. Maybe it's because EK all-in-one coolers are a little bit longer, but my Test Bitspower Leviathan 2 360, that's a slim, that actually fitted in there fine. So it was strange that a rad for a custom loop would fit, but not the rad from an all-in-one cooler. Now that Bitspower is 393 millimeters long, so that is the max length if you do want to throw an all-in-one cooler or a custom loop rad on the side. But in saying that, I would probably use that for either fans in the rear or something like a reservoir like this. But in saying that, with this reservoir, it was super tight as well. This is a new Bitspower CR360 Slim. Now these are much thinner than a normal FLT or flat reservoir. This one is just 25 millimeters thick, not including the pump. So the actual main area is super thin. But even then, I still had to manage to try and jam it in between the side rad location and then the front rad and the fans, but I did manage to just get it to fit. Now, one thing I do want to cover is the packing material. Now, probably some of you guys don't care, but this is quite an expensive case. The packaging material was the really rock hard styrofoam. I would think with the quality of this case, like it is a very nice case, it should come with the packaging material sort of to match the rest of the case. So the more softer, squishy foam, I think would have been better. One thing for those custom water coolers out there who do want to go with the custom loop in this rad, I just want to just mention that if you do go with a 40mm thick rad at the front, you will lose all of your 3.5-inch hard drive storage support. So if you go with the 40mm thick rad at the front, 25mm thick fans, that's 65mm in thickness. You've got 67 at the front, which is enough, it will fit, but that extends too far to install any of the hard drive cage 2 drive cages from Be Quiet, and then even 2 at the bottom. So I just want to mention that if you are looking to go with a custom loop, and then you do want to go with some storage drives, 2, 3, or 4, however many, you will have to go with a slim rad at the front with normal fans and not the 40mm thick rad. Now about the build, you might be wondering what the heck is this Bitspower CPU block. I've used this before. This is in collaboration with Modding Cafe. What they do is the ins and the outs. So there's 2 ins on the left side and there's 2 outs on the right side. So it uses the pass-through holes on the motherboard that normally you run your standoffs through to install like an all-in-one cooler or your water block. Those 4 holes is where the coolant goes in and out. Now as for flow, I haven't really tested this too much. I had no issues on the build I did last time. That was probably nearly a year ago now on the Pro Art build, but even in this build I had no issues with flow and so on. That is a really cool, and it's just something different instead of having tubing coming around the CPU area. I already mentioned the Bitspower Slim CR360 fans are the Silent Wings Pro 4. Very nice fans. I think for you guys, my downside might be that there's no RGB. I think they do have RGB coming out at Computex, and mind you, this is launching probably exactly 1 week before Computex, so I'll definitely take a look at Be Quiet, see what new fans I have coming and any new cases. But yeah, the Silent Wings Pro 4 fans, very nice, come in black and white, super silent, and there is a switch on the back to change them to like low, medium, and I think it's ultra high, something like that. Haven't spent too much time with them, but they are very nice fans. I think if one thing the system did lack, probably was a bit of RGB around the fans. Now I want to mention one issue in the water cooling market at the moment is the issue with 40mm thick white radiators. Now, you might be wondering, why did I go with the slim white 360 at the top and a slim white 360 at the front? That's because there's only one brand that does a 40mm thick 360 radiator, and that is Premature. Pretty much because Premature can paint any radiator they do, so they can just paint white ones, but unfortunately, they do not have any in stock. They're sold out everywhere, and I don't know if they are getting any more back in. So I had to drop it down to 30mm thick or just slim rads in the black. That's fine. There's plenty of brands that do 40mm thick in black. So I think all the EKs are 44. So it goes from 30 to 44, or they'll go from 30 to 45 or 30 to 54, I think, for Hardware Lab. So there's no others that do 40. So if you want to max out the rad spots, because the top can do 65, so that's exactly 40 and a 25 for the fan, and the front can do 67, which is 40, and a 25, which is 65, so that's enough. So just keep that in mind. If you were thinking about picking up the white case, you wanted white rads to deck this out, you may have to go down to slims, which I did in this build. Now finally, the price. Now you're looking at $299 US for either the black or the white 901. They are the same price. Now to me, that is a lot, but in saying that, you are getting a heap of accessories a heap of features, even though it's not so good for custom water cooling. And I have to try and change my mindset on some of these videos where I see a case that is on the high scale of the price and it doesn't have that great water cooling support, because I have to remember not everyone is out there to build crazy custom loops. Some people just want a high quality case to do something like an air build or an all-in-one cool build, and this case is perfect with that. Like, I'm just looking at the back behind this camera where I've got all the boxes that this case all came with this case, and there are so many accessories, so many bits and pieces you can change up with this case, and that in itself is probably why the price has jumped up a bit on the 901. I think that is it on this video. Quite a long one, but there was a heap of items or heap of features I had to cover, which I just mentioned before. But anyway, I want to thank you guys for watching. I want to thank Be Quiet for sending this out to check out, and we'll see you in the next one.